Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. And someone will say his career can never be saved. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Just Nicolas Cage, the show where I very slowly work my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography. Today I'm looking at the 1992 movie Honeymoon in Vegas. So in Honeymoon in Vegas, Nicolas Cage and Sarah Jessica Parker go to Vegas to get married. The big shot gambler James Caan has his eye on Sarah Jessica Parker, and he hustles Nicolas Cage in a game of poker into owing him $65,000. But he offers to waive the debt if Sarah Jessica Parker agrees to spend the weekend with him, and hijinks ensues. So a sleazy rich guy offers up a bunch of money to spend the weekend with a woman that's already going out with somebody. We've all seen that before in movies and shows. It's a real trope at this point.
Homer, I will give you $1 million to let me spend a weekend alone with your wife.
$1 million? Wait a minute. How much sex would be involved? As if it's some.
The most obvious comparison to this movie is Indecent Proposal. They both have the exact same premise. I think they both even involve Vegas and poker. But the funny thing is this movie came out a year before Indecent Proposal did. In fairness, Indecent Proposal was based on a novel. But yeah, it is weird when stuff like that happens in Hollywood. Like Ants and Bugs Life and Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down coming out like a year apart. So unlike Indecent Proposal, this movie is actually played as a comedy. Which makes sense, because the premise on paper is very dark and kind of sexist, so why not throw in a few jokes to lighten things up, I guess. But as for if the humor works, well, there's a bunch of jokes that just aren't good. Like Nicolas Cage sees a bunch of Indian people dressed as Elvis, and he goes, oh, they must have really liked this movie, Blue Calcutta. I mean, I get it, Blue Hawaii, but it doesn't really make sense. There's another part I thought was really unfunny with Peter Boyle, who I usually love, by the way, from Taxi Driver and Everybody Loves Raymond. But he shows up as this guy pretending to be a Native American, I guess. And he just says a bunch of nonsense which is meant to be funny.
You are from mainland.
That's right.
Do you find Chief Orman attractive?
It's a very strange scene and a little bit racist. It kind of reminded me of when Rob Schneider would pop up in an Adam Sandler movie as this wacky caricature of a guy. In fact, this whole movie kind of has the vibe of one of those Adam Sandler movies. You know, the ones where you can tell that most of the reason this movie was even made is because the cast and crew wanted a holiday in a tropical place. I think the Vegas and Hawaii setting of Honeymoon in Vegas was a big factor in the production of it being made. The movie also opens with like a surprisingly dark scene, where Nicolas Cage's mother is on her deathbed, and she makes him promise to never get married, and then she dies and it like zooms in on her face, and then it like smash cuts into a wacky like cartoon opening credit sequence. The whole thing about the promise to the mother actually does become like an important part of Nicolas Cage's character's character arc, but it was still a very jarring and strange way to open your comedy movie. There's just a real cheap and cheesy feel to this film. You've got these clunky screen wipe transitions that just kind of cheapen the look of the film. There's a corny, unnecessary voiceover, and the whole plot just hinges on these dumb contrivances and conveniences, like James Caan's ex-wife just so happens to look exactly like Sarah Jessica Parker. And James Caan and Sarah Jessica Parker just so happen to pop up on the news just when Nicolas Cage is watching it, which allows him to know exactly where in Hawaii they are. Just a lot of telltale signs of a run-of-the-mill comedy from the early 90s. That being said, there are some elements that do work here, most of which are mainly due to my boy Nicolas Cage. Up to this point in his career, Nicolas Cage has done a few movies with comedic elements, like Valley Girl, Raising Arizona, Peggy Sue Got Married, Moonstruck, and Vampire's Kiss. Actually, I still don't know if Vampire's Kiss was meant to be a comedy, but, you know, it made me laugh. But this movie has way more emphasis on the humor than all those other movies. This is the closest he's done to a straight-out comedy at this point. I found an interesting interview from Nicolas Cage, where he said that before he made this film, he was watching an interview with Jim Morrison, where he said that he never made a song that conveyed pure happiness. And Cage said that he related to that. He was worried that after all these angry and brooding roles, he'd be seen as like a pretentious actor. so he decided to start doing more comedy. And living up to that, Nicolas Cage plays his part perfectly here. He kind of starts off as standard Nicolas Cage, but with a little bit more of a comedic delivery. But then as the plot escalates and gets zanier, so does his performance, to the point where he's just shouting and freaking out in every other scene by the end. By the third act, he's so unhinged, all his dialogue has become a series of screams. The freakout he has in the airport is definitely the highlight of the whole film.
If you make your travel arrangements 2 weeks in advance at the airport...
this line? We're all flying today.
Please, sir, if you don't get back on...
Then what? I'll be arrested? Put in airport jail? Just get your ticket and move on, okay? Get your goddamn ticket and move on!
There's another great part where he gets taken to meet Peter Boyle's character I talked about earlier. He's told that he's this great chief, but it's obviously a scam. And when Pat Morita says, oh, he's got a lot of influence, Cage goes,
Influence? He lives in a shack!
It's a great example of how Nicolas Cage can just elevate such an innocuous line. Like in the script, I'm sure it said, influence, he lives in a shack. But the way he chose to deliver it is so hilarious and perfect. And also the manic, unhinged quality to his performance makes sense here. His character gets thrown through all these stressful hurdles, so obviously he's freaking out a bit. And Nicolas Cage captures that perfectly. He was actually nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Comedy/Musical for this performance. And yeah, I can see why, he deserved it. As for the rest of the cast, James Caan is solid. His character's wife died of skin cancer, which is another unnecessarily dark detail, by the way. Yeah, but his character's a real evil scumbag, but he plays it well. Sarah Jessica Parker is okay here. She's just not really given much to do compared to Cage and Caan. It's kind of like the last Nicolas Cage movie I reviewed, Zandali, where it's this love triangle with 2 men and a woman, but the woman is really underwritten. So she just kind of feels objectified, especially because her character's literally like being purchased. Sarah Jessica Parker is game at the very least, though. There's a part where she's like screaming, "You made me a whore," and she's like saying it in front of all these little kids. That's kind of the most fun she gets to have in the whole movie. Another famous face you might recognize is this little kid dressed as Elvis. That's a 6-year-old Bruno Mars. Seriously. And he's cute here. I'd rather listen to this than the Lazy Song or some of his other garbage. By the way, this is the second movie in the space of 2 years that Nicolas Cage did that involves Elvis. Remember his character talked like Elvis in Wild at Heart, and he sang Love Me Tender at the end. Then you got this movie, which is full of Elvis stuff. Every frame has a guy dressed as Elvis. Then 10 years later, he married Elvis's daughter. The man sure loved Elvis. Overall, this movie was better than I thought it would be. I know that sounds weird because I've been 90% negative about this whole movie for this review. But when I saw that I had to watch a rom-com with Sarah Jessica Parker, I was like, oh god, this is gonna suck. But honestly, it could have been a lot worse. Once it gets going, it moves along at a breezy pace. There's some fun moments, and Nicolas Cage is genuinely very entertaining here. At the same time, though, there's nothing particularly great about it. It's an early 90s rom-com packed full of cliches and contrivances and jokes that don't really work. But it's just about watchable. Yeah, if you're flicking through the channels or Netflix or something, Honeymoon in Vegas, sticking on for a bit. But don't go out of your way to watch it, it's not that good. So the next notable on-screen appearance Nicolas Cage made was not a movie, but I'm gonna keep that a surprise until my next review. So until then guys, thanks for watching.